So I'm actually really interested in hearing where you're coming from with your thesis,
Yeah, okay.
because I've thought a lot about Muay Thai and its propagation to the West and our role in it, and but I really have nobody to talk about it with because it's not the way that most people have discourse. So
Yeah.
I'm excited to hear what your thesis is or what you're thinking about in terms of Muay Thai.
Yeah,
Uh,
I'm excited to have a sounding board for someone who knows what I'm talking about. I'm either talking to academics who know nothing about Muay Thai, or I'm talking to fighters who are just blankly staring at me like, "What are you talking about?" And
totally.
I haven't had anybody to talk about this with either, except for the kind of little bits that I can. And in reading, it was the it was your post. What was it called? The slow cooker and the hack.
Oh yeah.
um, that like I forwarded that to my advisors, and they're like, this is literally almost verbatim what you told us you were trying to write about.
Whoa, that's very
Yeah.
cool then.
Yeah. So I mean, I met with my advisors this morning. We were super excited for the opportunity to get to speak with you, and they were just like, this is run with this. This is someone who's talking like you're talking. See what you're all talk about.
Very, very much. So
Yeah.
where are you? Okay, what part of that article really like opened your channel of thought and you're like, this is where I'm going?
It was towards the end, and you're spending time in that article, the slow cooker, kind of slowly building this argument of just like the analogies with being able to cook a stew versus being able to like cook something very quickly, and the types of flavors that come out of those processes. And it was really when you start to talk about why the comparisons to colonialism within an economic and territorial sense with knowledge,
Mm,
and the way that we go in, that styles are developing. It's exactly, that's what I tried to was telling people, just in being a martial artist myself and observing styles. What you see in the West a lot is this very efficient based thing. Give me the most efficient thing, give me it now, and I want the instant gratification of doing it now.
right,
And just give me what's useful to get me through the next fight.
right.
um, so when you started touching on that, then the connections to the machine and industrialism, that was like, I used that exact thing one time, was like, we consume martial arts in this country much like we consumed resources.
Yeah,
We produced martial arts in this company much like we produced goods in the industrial era.
right.
um, so there's a whole mind frame that comes with imperialism. There's a whole mind frame that comes with imperialism, uh, in, that is more so than just territory, more so than just culture or governance. It's can cross over into so many more things.
Yeah, for me, I when I was writing that, I don't know if I included the analogy. I think I might have very briefly, but I just get a very strong sense that we're mining resources that
Yeah.
are um, they're not even really replenishable resources because the act of mining them changes their modes of production in Thai culture. Even at
Yeah.
these techniques have been developed over, let's say, 100 years. Really, there's about 100 years of modern Muay Thai in a just a rich ecosystem of gyms and promotions and stadiums and a very to me kind of like an Amazon of techniques, really, where
Right.
you go to the Amazon and you just see a new species over and over and over again, and you're like, wow, this is so rich. But then you try to extract, even with good intentions, those resources, and as you're doing that, you're changing the ecosystem itself, and that concerns me in a way because it doesn't concern me in a worry way, but rather in an ethical way. Like, you want to think about what are you doing when you're doing this extraction? Like,
Yeah.
should you be acting in a way to preserve make sure that you can preserve elements, because you're going to be changing things that you can't foresee,
Mm-hmm.
but you can do it in a more conscientious way, maybe. So
Right.
that's where I'm coming from. I have this strong mining or Amazonian concept of an ecosystem that has developed over 100 years.
Yeah, I really like that analogy because then I come from a little bit of kind of a ecological sociology, ecological background, things like that. So, you know, now I love that analogy because now you're getting into like diversity of species and the diversity of styles. And that's one of the things that's opened up my eyes so greatly more than anything with Sylvie's blogs and your all's post is the wide variety of styles.
Yeah.
Not one being better, but them being created in this platform and being absorbed and transmitted in this platform. You know, there's not a hierarchy to what species are in the Amazon. They're all together. It's not the Amazon without each one of those species. What I love that you constantly all say is that Muay Thai is not the same if you just silo these styles. They have to be consumed together. They have to be appreciated together.
Yeah, 100%. And I have a big part of the shock that there are so many different styles and techniques in those styles, and they all serve different purposes, is that as Westerners, our main exposure to Muay Thai until very recently is Westerners learning one or two particular things, having one gym experience, even a very rich gym experience, and then bringing it back as the expert. That only a very little bit can pass through that keyhole. Yeah. It's like you went to the Amazon and you brought back an unusual frog, and the whole ecosystem and all the variation of species can't fit on your boat. And so for a long time, our concepts of Muay Thai were reinforced by this process of the transfer of knowledge, where only a little bit could come over. And there have been some great Thai ex-fighters and masters that have come to America too. But even then, you have a very narrow keyhole through which Thai techniques and heritage is passing. And I think this gets reinforced because in the commercial dimension of this is that if you trained and fought in Thailand in, like, let's say 1997, and then you opened a gym, you have a lot of financial and social investment in being an authority. Like, you're talking to people who haven't even seen Muay Thai before. And so what you know becomes very codified, even if it's not even your intention. So it doubles down on this like narrowing of what Muay Thai is. And so
Right.
from my perspective is there's two things. One is, and it's been part of our mission behind the library, why we like do hour-long videos, is preserve as much of this variety as possible, and also acknowledge that in transferring it to the transfer of knowledge to the West, there's been a very restricted kind of like, I don't know, commercialization and rationalization of the techniques. As you say, MMA hasn't really helped because they just are like, just give me the technique, give me the elbow I can use,
Right.
and extract the elbow, almost like how you would extract the chemical compound of an unusual plant in the Amazon.
Right.
Like, just give me the thing that works.
Right.
Right. And so that too has added to this narrowing of what Muay Thai is to us in the West, I think. Does that follow along with where you're thinking?
Oh, that's exactly where I'm thinking. And even more so beyond the like the academic sense and just thinking about my thesis, that's, you know, I've been a martial artist myself since I was 17, and I've gotten to train very traditional martial arts, and I've been exposed to a lot. And that sort of thread that you're going with, what fits through the keyhole, is something that's really common. You know, we talk about it right now. The thing I'm most involved in is going through the ranks of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And one of the instructors who I love, he was like, when you hear about the glory days of like Gracie Jiu-Jitsu happening in garages, one of those guys who was in the garage lives here in Humboldt. And So we have a really nice direct line to the tree in that sense. But he has this really great analogy, and I think it fits for any martial art, and especially something as diverse as Muay Thai. He says that, you know, what you as an instructor, as a black belt brings is this much of jujitsu.
Yeah.
Where jujitsu is all of this, me getting my black belt is really this corner over here.
Yeah.
And you know, same thing with Muay Thai, is you have Muay Thai is this big, and you have each style, and you have the whole performance of it. And when we come over as Westerners, we only get to see, you know, these very small chips. And we're only bringing back these very small pieces, like what you said, what fits through the keyhole in the limited amount of time that we would spend there. 3 months, a few weeks, even a few years is still only,
Yeah.
you know, this much of everything that was there. And so things, and just like you said now, and you've written about it a little bit, someone goes to Thailand or they go to Brazil or China, they get this little piece from the time they spent there, and now they come back as the authority. And you know, some people, you know, love that authority and say, yeah, this is exactly what Muay Thai is because I went there and I saw it.
Yeah.
You have some other people who are like, no, listen, it's really only, I got one small piece. But much like you're saying, and MMA follows that same very Americanized principle of things. Let's pick the pieces apart, take what is exactly needed. Same thing with, like, you know, even just food and vitamins. It's not, you know, the carrot itself, it's the vitamin A, the vitamin C, the vitamin K. If I just have these three things, then it's as good as eating a carrot.
Yeah, and that's that hack mentality, which
Right.
is let's find the and what's interesting about MMA, not to go, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but
Right.
because they're fusing martial arts together, like each, you know, normally it would take 10 years, 20 years to master a single martial art fighting style. And instead you have to like extract some elements of that and fuse it to other elements in another style and create a philosophy and strategy on how to fight in a brand new rule set.
Right.
So it accelerates the need and the praise of this kind of extraction.
Right.
And I find it, you know, I find the whole process worthy. I mean, like if I was one of the Westerners that came and fought in Thailand in the late 90s, early 2000s and fucking slept on the mattress, and I would be overwhelmed by the experience of feeling like I am tapping into the raw nerve of what real Muay Thai is, right? And if I came back, I would want to communicate the power of that authentic experience to people who can't even picture what a tuk-tuk is. I understand why the process is happening that way, and maybe not everybody's a good actor, but most of them are. And it's like, I think the first thing we have to do is get our heads around what it is that happened and is happening, if only so that we can make sure we don't destroy what we love, which is the source of the whole thing, right? For me,
Yeah.
that's where I'm thinking.
You know, and even just the style that you all are presenting the material in is kind of true to form, in the fact that if you just look at the types of videos that are out there for teaching striking, for teaching Muay Thai, they're very short, they're very condensed. It's, you know, it's usually a Westerner, it's usually someone who's not Thai and hasn't had that experience. You know, they've learned it, they've watched it, but they haven't absorbed that into their body yet. You know, and so you can see the same thing in just the way that information is communicated versus the way that you all communicate the information. Your Sylvie speaks in Thai, she translates the Thai. Just the pace of the videos, the pace of instruction shows the difference in how the two mindsets are operating.
And I like how you're saying about it getting into their body. Like I understand why videos are short. And I understand why also the process of the commercialization of knowledge, making it a product, requires it to be kind of, it's like in Amazon, you have to be able to put the book in a box and ship it to a home. Like there is a process through which the knowledge has to flow. And so making it modular and broken is a part of this whole capitalization, right? The soaking it into the body, we just put up a video of slow motion of crew man-op who's a Sanchez pad holder, just doing a normal teep, like a plain ass teep. And in the slow motion, you can see how much that movement is soaked in his body. And the mechanics of what he is doing is very simple. Like, it's the kind of thing that if you practiced it for an hour, you could do it. But all the little micro, like maybe we're getting into Bourdieu's habitus, the dispositions that go within that technique of having practiced it for 10 years, fought with it, they create a different movement. It's not the same movement as if you had practiced it for an hour or 10 hours or a year even. And I think that's something that's lost in this keyhole that through which knowledge is passing. Like you're saying, is that even the examples are not they're not soaked in the whole ecosystem that produced them.
Right.
You kind of, I think we agree.
Yeah, and it's like that. I think that's exactly the kind of thing that Bourdieu talks about, and with the habitus and the experiential part, not just reading something, not just seeing and watching it, but doing. One of the things actually was really fun right after I was reading Bourdieu with habitus, and one of his students, I'm going to butcher his name, I'll show you it. I think it's Loak Wakwant.
Okay, good.
He's one of Bourdieu's students, and he produced this book called Body and Soul, and it's an ethnography about boxers in Chicago in the 80s.
Whoa, that's something I have to read.
Oh, if you can't get a hold of a copy, I will send you one gladly. It's a wonderful book. And he talks about habitus being absorbed into your body and the knowledge being not in your brain, but in the tacticalness. And I got to experience this one day right after jiu-jitsu. I was teaching a class and I was reviewing a lesson from one of our masters. And as I was doing it, there was something about it that I was like, I'm missing something. I'm teaching this incorrectly. There's one step I'm missing and I couldn't remember the step. And I'm explaining it and I'm doing it. And I broke everyone off and they were practicing it. And it wasn't until somebody put a little bit of pressure on me, not thinking with my head, I needed the physical push, that I was like, boom, there was the P. I remembered it instantly. And it was in my body. It wasn't in my head. The movement was in my body. And I think one time, I think there was either, I don't have my notes in front of me, either you wrote it or Sylvie had mentioned it, but Muay Thai being the same thing. I think it was in the, and I was thinking about it a lot in the video of the slow-mo elbows of the headhunter of 100 stitches. I forget his name, and I'm not gonna,
the elbow.
Like, it was, they were talking about the movements being in his body. And I think that's what
the movement
we're talking about.
That's a beautiful video. That actually really communicates, because these are not even elbows that you would throw in a fight, but they are expressive of the years of his love and saturation with the elbow movement. That is just, it is unreal. And what's actually, I don't want to go too far to the side, but I'm actually interested in this because I looked up your link that you sent me to LinkedIn, and I see that you're a black belt in Kung Fu.
Yeah.
And Kung Fu forms are really interesting because they pass through several keyholes. It was a living fighting art, I don't know, 100 years ago or something. I don't know how long ago, where it was developed through fighting, and then it had to preserve itself throughout history by reifying itself into forms and putting itself within a philosophy of life also, which helped preserve the form, right?
Right.
And the dispositions that you need to have for them. I'm curious how you feel as someone who studied a traditional martial art that was probably transformed from a living martial art a long time ago. Like, how do you connect to the sense of authenticity about that? Because there's something very beautiful about that to me too, that this is lived in this way, like a time capsule.
That's a great question. See, like, so I, the living part, I think that comes into play, the traditional like origin story of our specific kung fu. I did a very specific style coming from a very specific region, and they called it San
Mm.
Su. And the whole origin story, it was developed by monks traveling a trade route. And they would, be accosted and attacked, on their trade route back and forth from the monastery. And so, yeah, they slowly over the years developed these things to protect themselves. And I've always thought of form more so from a way of teaching the body to move without having
Mm.
dramatic things happening all at one time, or you don't have a partner, you don't have great training resources. I always saw form as a training mechanism, but also
Right.
almost as a dance, in the fact that like I don't just do the motions, I need to perform the motion. And then
Mm. Mm.
aesthetically it needs to look a certain way, and chances are aesthetically if it's looking a certain way it's going to function a certain way. um, and that's always been my thought on the form.
Yeah, but what's interesting to me is the living martial art, let's say as it was 70 years ago, had to take on the forms became the method of transmission.
Okay, yeah.
Not only was it from teacher to student in a, let's say, a dojo of some kind, where you had very rigid ways of acting and living around the martial art, the forms became the thing that the student learned and then took to another location, and then student learned and took to another location,
Yeah, okay, I'm
and
following.
that's how the martial art survived in a way. It's how it propagated all the way to America, right?
Right.
Muay Thai is going through something that's kind of similar in a way, but there aren't forms. There are angle of the kick, throw the elbow this way. Also, there's cultural trappings like wear the Mong Khan or call me Crew or Arjan. Like they, there seems to be some kind of parallel between the two, in that there's a process of kind of propagation that
Right, okay.
is taking it away from what developed it, which was fighting, actual
I
fighting.
Yeah, okay. So maybe I have a better setup for that. And I think it might come back to like the keyhole idea and how vast each of these martial arts are. And I think you see a lot of that. Um, what's so just to use our kung fu, like the story is that we had one guy come over. His name was Jimmy Woo.
Mm.
That was his Americanized name so that
Yeah.
people talk to him. And Jimmy had, when he came over to the States, he couldn't even call it kung fu because people didn't know what the
Right.
hell he was talking about. So he called it like karate kung fu, and people would come in like, okay, karate, that sounds familiar.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he had like I think there were like 6 original black belts, the first generation guys. And even just watching those first generation guys, you see that dissemination of information where one guy got this from Jimmy, another guy got this from Jimmy,
Yeah.
leverages, kicks, strikes.
Right.
And then each of the students is disseminating something else, and then now the exposure to other martial arts come in, where we're going to do a block like a kung fu, but we're going to kick like a Thai. We're going
Mm.
to sweep like kung fu, but we're going to choke like jujitsu.
Right.
And that starts to get contested in what is true kung fu, what is authentic kung fu, and what would have Jimmy done. And
Right.
um, and so, but what you can see and what I appreciate when you look back at all of the first generations is that you can see Jimmy in each one of these masters. You watch them be like, that's what he picked up from Jimmy. Oh, that's such and such's students. They move exactly like him.
Right.
I move like my master moves like his moves like Jimmy. And you can literally see that transmission of body mechanics just watching the videos throughout the years.
So what's interesting is, okay, so Muay Thai, as it started to become more popular in the West, grafted onto I believe, the karate and kung fu model, which is this transmission of style, right? But
Okay.
it lacks, because it was a living sport, it lacks the capsule of, I don't know how to describe the social situation of the transmission is much more informal. So what you end up getting is not a strong transmission of a single style from a single lineage of teachers and fighters, but rather you get a very diluted version of a style. Like, this is how to properly throw an elbow, this is how to throw a knee, right? And then also, but what is lacking is the Thai transmission of techniques, which is the entire Muay Thai camp social structure and fighting regimen from a very young age. So Muay Thai finds itself in this kind of like in-between place where it lacks the cultural structures of traditional martial arts, which ensure the transmission of style more purely, and then it also lacks the total context, the ecosystem of fighting that Thailand has. Like, right, style techniques are not transmitted in any way in Thailand the way they are in traditional martial arts at all. Like in our gym, which is a pretty traditional gym, there's very little correction of the Thai boys. Like, you'd be shocked. I wrote about that in the slow cook hack, in that there is no actual moments of transmission. You just have a lifestyle, a habitus that develops in each person. So where in the West, what is the way forward, given that you don't have the like traditional social structures, and you also don't have the gym fighting, the Kai Muay social structure either? I see people are trying to fight more in the West, spar more, clinch more, but it feels like Muay Thai doesn't have a clear way forward. We just have rocks to avoid more.
I feel, and what I think is that's the biggest impediment to like really transferring authentic Muay Thai in the way that you all are trying to portray it is literally the American mindset. Is, you know, one, we want instant gratification, and that's right. Like, honestly, I'm not gonna lie, it's what makes me a really good kung fu teacher, is because I can make you successful almost instantly at my kung fu technique. It right. Can be a little bit more raw. It can be a little bit more intuitive. It was developed as like, we just need to get out of this situation and back to safety. So right. It's really easy to just be like, let me show you these 5 mechanics. And once you have those 5 mechanics, boom, instant gratification. Where the Muay Thai, what I love about the Muay Thai, and why I think it's such a great contextual tool for trying to explain things like habitus and Orientalism, is because Muay Thai is a process. Like, you know, and I think it's what you said, it's lifestyle that develops lifestyle. You have to live, and you have to let that become into your body, and you can't do that by correcting somebody over and over and over again, which is something Americans want. Like, tell me what I'm doing wrong so I can fix my foot, so I can fix my follow through, so that my kick is strong. Where right. You know, the Thai sensibility, and actually what I've always liked in just my own martial art, because of the way I learned personally, is like, let me just feel it. Let me feel right. The ways to do it wrong. Let me feel the ways to do it right. Let me feel all the little minutia of it. And then we can start talking about your foot being this way, or your toes putting that way. Like, feel the mechanics. And I just don't know if Americans have that kind of patience. We're used to boom, boom, boom. Tell me, show me, let me master it and get it. Let me do it.
Well, one of the interesting things we've run into in Thailand is that the very best teachers of Muay Thai can teach you Muay Thai in a day. Right? Like how you talk about, like, let's just give you 2 or 3, 4 mechanics, go hit the bag, and suddenly you're in the ballpark. you can actually proficiently do something you couldn't do the day before or 5 days before. We've had people go from 0 to fighting in 3 months in our gym. Andy Thompson, who just passed, who is a Westerner in Chiang Mai, who opened the Lana camp, was an incredible teacher. He was here for 20 years, and you'd be fighting in 3 weeks with relatively little experience because, yeah, there are elements of Muay Thai that are very transmittable, but they're only transmittable if you've been soaking in the culture and the process for a very long time. So much so that you see how simple it is. If you're trying to actually mechanically convey knowledge, it's not simple at all. Like the Thai kick is like the golf swing. If you try to minutely control it and say every little thing that could go wrong, it's an unending process. So there is an element of Muay Thai, if the teacher is at a super high level, that can teach Muay Thai very quickly. It doesn't mean you're going to be at a high level for years, because then you have to soak it, right? Just soak in it. But I don't know. I guess part of this is that the people who are, it's not just the American mindset, but it also is the people who necessarily are teaching Muay Thai are not 20-year fighters. They haven't been doing it since they were children, right? We necessarily come to it when we're older. Almost everybody does. So we lack the ability to convey the simplicity of the art maybe in a way that would satisfy people. Instead, because also we teach in classes, right? So we have to teach 20 people at a time. So you have to break things down into mechanical movements that can be imitated by 20 people. Very far from how Muay Thai is communicated in Thailand. Just the class structure alone, even if people wanted to learn it in a different way, forces Muay Thai through that another keyhole, right? Right. I don't know what really the answer is, other than let's just keep celebrating the diversity of species and the process of, fighting since you were 10, and this propagation of a life experience over, that's one reason why we're so interested in these legends, is that each one of them is a capsule not only of a fighting technique, but also all the gyms they've been in and all the fights they've fought. Like every wrinkle on their face is a fight wrinkle in a way. And they're very precious, in that sense. But if you think that the problem is the American mindset, and let's say it's maybe just a Western mindset, which is just this consumer concept of martial arts, right? Is it just a matter of just trying to be as close to the source as possible? Like, I don't know, what are you just advocating critiquing the process in some way?
I think it would even just be a matter of letting the process happen and being more emphasis of the process instead of the end result. A big part of the mindset is, and a lot, like even just in Kung Fu, the question that I get all the time is, how do I get my black belt? How do I get my black belt? Same thing, students even just going through school. How do I get my degree? What do I got to do to get my degree? It's that end, as if the end is going to make us talented or happy or enthusiastic, include your X there. Where I like to tell, my students is like, if you want a black belt, I'll effing give you a black belt. It holds up your gi, but do you want to learn this? Do you want this to be a part of you? And if you want that to be a part of you, then enjoying the process, no matter how frustrating it is, no matter how long that plateau is, emphasizing the process, which has to be, and then what do you want to get out of it? If you just if you're, you know, like have like a supplement mentality where you just want to pop the vitamin A, pop the vitamin C, you know, very mechanically, then you know what, there's an ability for you to do that. But if you want to be holistic and you want to understand the expressiveness of these things and how they kind of intertwine together, then there's a different kind of conversation, there's a different preparation that has to happen. And I think that preparation has to be on the process.
Yeah, just even talking about this makes me so concerned. Like, I mean, it's great that we're having the conversation and that we're reflective on maybe the last 15, 20 years of the propagation of Muay Thai techniques. But it's like MMA, kickboxing is putting huge pressures on Muay Thai to just to change itself in some very powerful cultural ways, like how scoring is done,
Yeah.
How fights are fought, how damage is thought of, how proficiency is seen. That there is a huge pressure that even in Thailand, it's not even in the West. The pressures even in Thailand is because Muay Thai is loved by an older demographic or by rednecks. The Thai equivalent of a redneck, which is rural people or poor people, that the demographic is aging out. And so now Muay Thai has to appeal to a much more kind of consumer-based, younger crowd, competing with soccer or football, which is a huge sport in Thailand. And these pressures are changing Muay Thai in a very radical way, even in Thailand. Right. So I don't know. It's a little bit disheartening. I'm just kind of feel like I want to run around and just like save as many species of the Amazon before we just bulldoze the whole thing for a cash crop. Like,
right.
I don't know. That's my thought when you're talking about this. A little bit worrying.
Yeah, it's a little bit worrying. And that's one of the things I've taken notice, though, as you mentioned it, is the way that process has happened through scoring. And what is a desirably scored match? Look at historical implications of how things were scored versus, you know, this precedent on emphasizing the knockout and finishing the match. And like finishing, like, you know, that's one thing that I've loved about your all's writings, is that, like, you know, a Western or a commercialized version of any fight, a finish is stopping it as soon as you can. Yeah. Where it's just like the Thais perform a fight. The finish is being able to go the whole 5 rounds, being conditioned enough, knowing enough about fighting to fight for that long, you know, and bringing out the best in your opponent. You know, the way that what is considered finishing and what's considered a strong opponent in a commercialized sense of fighting is, again, just reflecting that a commercialized spirit of everything else. What is the end product? And
well, there is maybe an analogy to discourse, in that if you're having an argument or a debate with somebody, there's finishing them where you like shout the insult or the thing that just shuts the guy up. And then there's finishing somebody by having a continued long conversation in which you eventually get them to accede that you were right. And you've convinced them that you were right. And that the 5-round arc of a fight is really about not trying to shut the conversation down, but let's keep the conversation going so that I can show you I know what I'm talking about. There is this sense of kind of, you're in community with your opponent. You are fighting them and you're attempting to show their weakness. A lot of Muay Thai, deeper Muay Thai scoring is about exposing the weakness of your opponent rather than showing your strength. So if you can make your opponent look off balance, or like they're chasing you or emotionally reacting in a way that they're not in control of themselves, these are powerful victories as a Thai, rather than just knocking somebody out. To them, a knockout is a kind of cheap win in a strange way. And knockout artists in Thailand were not they were loved, but they were not esteemed in the same way that somebody like, I don't know, some art or somebody who can just look like they're not even fighting for 5 rounds.
Right.
There is a definite cultural barrier there, and part of what concerns me a little bit, I talk about this in my 6 essential core concepts of Muay Thai,
Yeah.
is that there's a concept of time
Yes.
that is involved in Thai scoring, which is, I think, agrarian, where
Yes.
time is
Yeah.
not a mechanical abstraction in which points are added up in, and each point is equal, like a mathematical unit that can be moved around without affecting the meaning of anything. That the narrative structure of Muay Thai that's involved in the 5 rounds, rather than, let's say, 3 rounds, which is becoming popular, is that, yeah, I understand you want the action, you want to get the younger viewers who are into it and appeal to non-super Muay, not the casual fan. I totally get it. But what you're doing when you move away, you change the sense of time. You're pulling on the fabric that made Muay Thai what it was. Like, that made all these techniques so effective, is that they come out of this different fabric of culture. And if you change that culture too much, you will kill the goose that lays the golden egg. Maybe not for 20 or 30 years, but I can't tell you how many Thais are like, Muay Thai will be in the hands of Westerners soon. Russians, French, Americans. We just talked to Jitty in Bangkok, who's been training Westerners for, I don't know, 25 years. And he was like, he says what Samart says, is that Muay Thai will not even belong to the Thais anymore. Like, the Thais won't even be the best. And for them, it's not, oh, the Westerners are going to be just so good. It's also that the Thais themselves are losing their interest in the preservation of their art and their sport.
Right. Right.
So it's very concerning in a way, because I think what's at risk is an ecological risk.
Right.
Does that make sense?
It does. It totally makes sense. I don't know if I don't agree. I disagree with you. I don't know how much more to add. Like that, those are
Yeah.
all the things that I'm thinking about, and why I kind of want to describe that process in my thesis is because we're talking about more than just how that it starts with sport, right? It starts with this, oh, no big deal that the rules change in Muay Thai. Why do we care if the rules change in Muay Thai on a grander scale of like governance, social criticism, whatever? The process you just described right there is the reason that's why it's significant. The impact and how people will change their culture and what's important to them, and then what ultimately becomes valid knowledge. Even if you have the handful of young up and coming fighters who really want to honor the old style of Muay Thai, well, if all the old guys are dying out and only the new people are existing, well, then if there's 100 new styles and 20 old styles, well, now that 100 is like, well, you guys are outdated, you guys are dumb, and that's where the Orientalism comes in. And
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about this. How do you? I know that's a second prong of your thesis. What is your Orientalism concern with Muay Thai in the West?
is that it's following a very specific process with how knowledge is disseminated. Who becomes the expert? Who becomes the holder of information? When I'm explaining it to like lay people, I'm just like, people would agree that whoever possesses the knowledge possesses the power, right? And we usually get people to agree with that, and I'm just like, okay, well, when you take I as X person haven't had X authentic experience because I will never be from Thailand. I will never be Thai. I will only be Tim from California.
Right.
Me writing about that subject is not as well-rounded as the actual experience. But if we are to take that experience out of the official realm of knowledge, well, then it disappears forever. And I can replace it with what I want. But being it sinister or not, I happen to be a critical kind of person and a kind of cynical person where I'm like, I think this is a little bit more sinister than people are going to pass it by.
Right.
I can't let that show through in my thesis. Of course, I have to be a little bit more level-headed about it. But,
Right.
the opportunity for something sinister is there. And, the process of Orientalism has happened with other sports in the Americas. We've done it with a lot of other sports. We did it with lacrosse and indigenous people. We did it with surfing people in Hawaii. We did it, and we're doing it with Muay Thai. And you described the process perfectly of like, okay, Westerners want a Thai box now, but we're not as good at clinching. So we changed the scoring and we make sure that the people who develop this aren't ever going to have a chance. We're creating a fair playing field, or however you want to describe
No.
it.
Yeah.
Those
Sure.
processes are and then, so we changed the rules so that Thais can't compete. And then you said it beautifully in the slow cooking one, is then we say that Thais don't even know what they're doing. They don't even use their techniques the way they could to be more powerful. Without the transmission there of, well, the reason that Thais throw a kick isn't to be powerful. The reasons that Thais throw kicks is for all these other reasons. Like, you're leaving out a big contextual piece of why a Thai would throw a kick that way. It's a different mentality. I'm not chopping up, a piece of garlic. I'm julienning a zucchini. It's
That's a very, very good analogy, and that takes me to something else. I don't know if I've ever written about it, but I've thought a lot about. Is that it's cuisine is a very good parallel here. That you get, foodies trying to preserve the history of a cuisine. Let's say Italian cuisine, which has this infinite variability of processes of aging meat and treating foods and pairing foods, that all became pizza and spaghetti, right? In other countries. And so there is this feeling like, how are we going to counter the there's just a vast cuisine of techniques in Thailand, people opening up basically fast food versions of a rich heritage in a strange way. And I know you have a feeling like there's a sinister element. For me, it's not important to identify particular people as sinister or not, but rather the process itself forces sinister-like changes. Like, if you're going to succeed in your community, you have to be seen as an authority. Like, who is going to give you money to teach them something if down the block there's somebody else who's seen as a greater authority? Whether that's because of the champions you've made, or the belt system you have, or the way you Y in your studio. Like, there is a real pressure to have to represent yourself as an authority, and also to be very good at communicating techniques quickly to a room full of people. Like, yeah, you want to weed out the bad people, but honestly, it's the system itself that just forces even very good people with deep intentions to have to kind of like sculpt themselves in this other kind of fast food kind of way. I don't know. It feels that way to me.
And I like that. And that's one of the things that, when I'm trying not to be cynical, how I have to explain it to people is exactly what you said there. It's the process that a lot of times is dictating our behavior. One of my advisors, he puts it in a really nice way of agency versus structure. What is the agency of a person versus what are the structural choices a person has to make? It's not that a Thai fighter necessarily wants to fight a certain way, but if they want a certain number of fights, if they want to fight with a certain promotion, if they want a specific paycheck or whatever the end result is, they have to change their style to meet those requirements.
100%.
Sure or not, even the best intentioned people, they're worried about their job, they're worried about whatever. You see that in American bureaucracy. If you look, everyone hates this organization, but it's not that the people in that organization are bad. They have a role to serve. Their role is to either decide did you do this yes, or did you do this no? It's not, you know, it's the over rationalization, you know, which is something that you wrote about and that I hadn't applied to this so much yet. But the rationalization of everything and the over hyper rationalization is really what's kind of trapping and forcing things to happen in a not authentic way. Not that, again, so that was, you reminding me of that is really great. It's not the cynicism, and it's not a matter of someone being cynical or sinister, but the process itself and what the system dictates that you do, which is kind of the scary thing about capitalism for me, and just being a kind of deep theoretical sociologist, is
Right.
that capitalism is this really scary, perfect system in the fact that it doesn't take into account maliciousness, radicalism. It forces a certain type of behavior. Otherwise, you can't succeed or even survive in that system. It pushes you out.
Right. As all systems do in a strange way. That one of the interesting quandaries that I think we face is that those of us who are drawn to Muay Thai, like powerfully drawn, like not, oh, that's a cool fighting style among 10 different other ones, but there's something about Muay Thai that just lights up the brain. The ease of the body, the violence of the strikes. There's no fighting art quite like it, because it's a living art. It's comes right out of 10,000 fights a year are fought in Thailand, if not more. The beauty, that thing, what draws us here, and especially people who come and move to Thailand like we do, it's because that thing is missing in our culture. What we see is the nutrient that is not in our food anymore. And we are like, that is beautiful. That is what we want. But then we come to Thailand and we come to the art and we end up trying to change the thing that created the nutrient that we need so much, right? There's a danger, like, okay, you come to Thailand or you love Muay Thai, and then you're like, but children shouldn't fight because in the West, that's child labor. Okay, I don't want to get into the argument what's right. It's a complicated argument, one way or the other. But you realize that Muay Thai is what it is because they've been fighting since they're 10 or 8 or 6. Like, it's in their body in an incredible way. That's what produced the thing that sparked your eye. Sanchai did not learn how to fight that way when he was 17. Like, he didn't start when he was 17. There's this thing where if you need that nutrient, if our culture, our Western culture needs that thing that Muay Thai and Thailand has, then we need to also preserve the ecosystem that produces it. We have to be careful that we don't work to undermine the ecosystem that makes that thing that speaks to the West. Like, this thing has to be preserved. And that's how I feel. I'm as guilty as anyone of just being entranced by Muay Thai, whatever that little element is. And I'm like, I don't want Muay Thai to be more like we are in the West, because then that thing will be gone. It won't exist anymore. 3-round fights or knockouts or knockouts. I don't know. It drives me crazy that you want to change the thing that you actually love.
Yeah, and I was really surprised. Like, it was really funny. Like, and it shows you the type of Muay Thai that I watch, and like how tuned in I am to it, because I literally had just gotten done. Like, someone was talking to me like, "Oh, how many Muay Thai fights are only 3 rounds, right?" Muay Thai. I was like, "No, Muay Thai fights are always 5. Like, they don't want to fight less than 5." And then I came back, was watching a video that same night, and it was like a 3 round. I was like, what is this 3 rounds? You can't even express yourself in 3 rounds. Like, what is that? Like, you're taking the whole thing out of it by just something as seemingly insignificant as 2 less rounds. And like, just that in of itself, I was like, that's barely Muay Thai. Like, what are you supposed to do in 3 rounds?
Yeah. You do damage. Whatever, you get as many health points knocked off your opponent. That's another dimension here. That's maybe the deeper spiritual or social dimension, is that the reason why Muay Thai is fought the way it is because Thais have a Buddhistic, but it goes beyond Buddhism, a particular concept about how to manage your own self and how to control yourself and how to deal with anger and rage and fear, things that are associated with fighting. And that the reason why they fight the way they do and they score the way they do and the aesthetics, like the boring rounds or the whatever, is because this is actually an exploration, a human exploration on how to deal with some of the most intense emotions a human can have. A lot of them are escalations of the self. And when you change that aesthetic and the scoring and the rounds, you are fundamentally changing the lesson of how to handle those emotions. It's profound. Like you have Bukao, who's a international superstar now, who's famous now for his like anime-like grimace of anger and rage. This is so not Thai. This is not Muay Thai. It's Japanese anime, basically. And as Muay Thai moves towards this other way of dealing with emotions, it's fundamentally becoming something different than it was. It's almost like you turn a pacifism into a aggressive culture or something. You have accounts. One of the oldest accounts of a Muay Thai fight, I think it's the oldest account of a Muay Thai fight in the 17th century, in the 18th century, 1700s, was two Frenchmen coming and challenging a Thai to a fight in the king's court. And the academics that record this talk about how it turned into mayhem, because what actually happened was the Frenchman encounters the Thai champion, and the Thai champion just starts to retreat and counterstrike him, and kind of like what you would see even today when a super aggressive Westerners fight a Thai. And the Frenchman became enraged because, why will you not fight me? Be a man. His brother the Frenchman's brother ended up jumping into the ring too. So there was 2 against 1, and it turned into mayhem. But what's so interesting is that even in the 1700s, the Thais already had this concept that I am mastering you by enraging you, by not engaging you, and counterstriking you. Like, you can see what happens in a typical Westerner versus Thai fight in 2019 was happening, I don't know, 200 years ago. It's incredible to me. But people are like, let's change this to make it more exciting, to make more money, make it more appealing to a younger crowd. You're messing with the fundamental DNA of what makes Muay Thai what it is, hundreds of years old. I'm not saying you shouldn't mess with it, but if you're going to mess with it, you should know you're doing some serious gene editing. That's how I feel.
Yeah, and it kind of, to bring it back into like the analogies of food, it's like it's like Kung Pao chicken. Like that's not a thing. You can't find that anywhere. Like that. Like you and there are the really great points you're making in there. But like the control of yourself, that's not, it's overlooked in the Western psyche. It's overlooked in what it is to be, even just masculinity. It's like what it means to be a man is not about controlling your emotions. It's about no emotion. I have no emotion because I'm a man, because that's what's expected of me. Or
you show rage and aggression in a kind of comic booky action adventure movie kind of way.
Right.
But that is the authentic fighter's heart, is this
and again, and that comes to this Orientalist aspect of like how we've portrayed the indigenous person. The indigenous person is not the sophisticated, controlled individual, because that would mean that we did something bad in imperializing them. You know, we have to portray them as these savage, animalistic, rage-inspired people because they needed to be tamed, and that's why we went in there and tried to take their land, or in some instances did take their land. That's why the Orientalism becomes important, because it's a justification for acting and portraying a history and a knowledge the way we have. And I think that the control aspect is lost in almost in a lot of different martial arts that I see, and especially with the advent of like just Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu competitions. You know, it's not anymore about controlling your opponent as it is about executing a technique. And controlling your opponent, one of my favorite quotes from kind of our master Jimmy Woo was like, a master of Kung Fu is nothing but a master of oneself. And that's lost a lot in some of these martial arts, especially when it lends itself so well to competition. Muay Thai lends itself so well to competition. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, karate, these things lend themselves to a competition structure.
Right.
And so the things that are harnessed out of that competition structure was one of the things I was looking to, like, when did a Muay Thai champion become a thing? Like, was it important to be a Muay Thai champion, or was it important just to be Muay Thai? You know, like there was something about, you know, people always want to talk about being a champion, being the best, or what have you. It was just like, well, can you even ever get to that? Like, what is being the best? Like,
Totally. This is actually, it was a big motivation for Sylvie to go on a slight tangent here, is that honestly, before Sylvie started posting about and telling her own narrative, the only legitimization you had as a female fighter was to be a world champion or a multi-time world champion. Everything was about belts. And still today, it is to a large degree about belts. But honestly, we looked around and none of these belts were kind of real belts. They're kind of made up promotions, hyping with a belt. There's no real rankings of female fighters that you can climb the rankings and legitimately the two best fighters in the world are fighting at that weight. And so we were like, there's actually no achievement place in female fighting. It was much less developed than male fighting, which itself was somewhat dubious too. So it became, let's make it 50 fights. Let's make it 100 fights. Let's make it 200 fights, which is, I'm just going to stay in the process. Like the championship is in the process. The belt, no belt, it didn't matter because, and we were kind of freed up by the fact that there was no belt that actually meant anything that you would really aspire to, because they were all kind of manipulated belts. And so we were kind of freed up to pursue a different way of thinking about things. If there had been some like unbelievable belt out there, it might have really skewed the way we think. But this is exactly what you go back to, this thing where you want the black belt in a martial art, you want the world, the national title, you want the whatever it is, right? There's something about this time where the West is starting to get into the concept. I see it with like Caitlin Young in America, Western fighter, who's really embracing this multiplicity of fight experiences, that you have to fight to teach, or that you want as many experiences as possible, that's the championship, is just as many experiences. It would be like you really love Italian, and you want, instead of like the Italian Speaker Award, you just go live in Italy and speak Italian all day and write poems in Italian. Like that's your belt, right?
right.
That's how. So I think that we're kind of at this crossroads here where I think people are starting to realize that belts are not the reason for things. But I don't know, because we're still far from America. We haven't been there for several years. And I know that promotions have to push belts in order to create participation and audience excitement. I totally get it. It's just part of the commercialization of the sport. But we have to also inspire people, like you're saying, to like live the art. Like you want to soak it in. Like that's the real excitement.
Yeah, and what you made me think about right there is the idea of what becomes these things, at least in this moment right now as we're talking, these themes seem to be most important because we're dictating who is the expert. The championship depicts, okay, that's
Mm.
the expert. They are literally wearing their credentials around their waist. Same thing with uh, one of the things that we talk about in the program is like, what is valid knowledge? Here in Humboldt, I don't know how specific you are familiar with California, but there is a big indigenous presence here
Yeah.
in Humboldt County, and we're in the thick of the forest where they say it's where the redwoods meet the ocean, and
Right.
managing these forests has become a thing where the people who know how to do it the best are the indigenous people who lived here for literally 1,000 years before we ever showed up.
Right.
And they never had problems with resources. They never had problems with wildfires. When things flooded, it wasn't catastrophic. There was no famine. And now all of a sudden we came in and said, you don't know what you're doing because you don't understand Western science. You are now no longer the possessor of knowledge. Our knowledge is more superior. Therefore,
Right.
we're going to manage these woodlands now. And now what do you see all across California? You see drought, you see catastrophic flooding, and you see catastrophic wildfires.
Right.
The championship, the black belt, the degree has all been a Western form of validating what is acceptable knowledge. And so if we're going to kind of look at, just Western American, whatever you want to say it, things are getting, more sciency. What is hard, provable knowledge? What is hard, provable? What is fact? What is truth? And in an era where the whole world values science, Western science,
Right.
um, in its reductionist, rationalized sense of being, how do we validate Muay Thai? How do we validate education? How do we
Oh,
validate
man.
it? And
It's very hard. It's
it's
very hard.
and it's with these kind of numeric, um, itemized things, this rationalized process. That's how we dictate the expert, is this rationalized checklist of statistics or of numerics, or not the experience of itself, not the guy who's owned a school for 40 years and has trained thousands of students. It's the guy who has had a school for 10 years but has 100 students and has 30 champions.
Right.
It's a tangible thing for the mindset that we live in, the time, the way that we presume time. It's this long, it's, I don't know.
Yeah, and well, I tell you, it's also happening in Thailand. It happens in the West for sure, but even now, because they're feeling that there's an erosion of the heritage, they're creating formal structures of creating a path of knowledge propagation with some of the great fighters and teachers of Thailand, like Diesel Noi or Berklerk. They've created a kind of like training seminar in order to um, create classes of knowledge among these people that have such depth of knowledge. But they're doing this so that they can go to Korea or America or Canada and create a teaching line. But honestly, this is a very commercialized, I don't know how to say it, a rationalized preservation of knowledge that the Thais themselves know is kind of ridiculous. That what Diesel Noi is doing in this seminar is like a a pinky nail of his knowledge as a person, as a fighter. And so even the Thais are creating a kind of like dilution of their own knowledge path, um, in order to try to preserve something and also probably make some money on it too.
So
So
it might be kind of more of like a chicken or an egg kind of conversation, but do you think it's specifically the Western influence on Thailand? Do you think this progression would have happened even without the Western influence?
I think you can't imagine Thailand without a Western influence, but Thailand is not just a traditional culture. It's highly capitalistic in a lot of ways. and Muay Thai flourished in the 90s when there was a huge business boom in Bangkok. Like literally what we think of as the peak of Thailand's Muay Thai was when there was an enormous amount of financial investment in Bangkok, which pulled everyone from the countryside into the city, all poor people, and then they all went to go see and bet on the fights. So the capitalistic maw that chews up everything traditional actually was responsible for the entire flowering of Muay Thai in the 90s and the early 2000s. And I think that theme has always been there, that the Thais are always looking to make money on their art. So I think that it's not really the Western influence so much as there's just a capitalistic impulse, which runs parallel to also traditional impulses to preserve traditions and heritages. So these processes in Thailand are attempt to do both, I think, is to kind of rationalize knowledge, creating a teaching line, but also something that you could probably charge people for in various ways. Like it's a natural kind of evolution in a way. It just, it's one more example that what's happening in the West is also happening within the country. There's a Peter Vale article I'll send you if you haven't read it. I don't know how much you've read into academic Muay Thai studies, but Peter Vale is, I think that's his name, really good. But he talks about this kind of commercialization of Muay Thai within Thailand for ideological purposes, basically reaffirming royalist nationalism. Although I find that part of it less interesting. I'm more interested in like how Muay Thai itself accommodates itself to market forces.
Okay. Yeah. I
Yeah.
think it's an interesting, like, one of the more interesting things that people kind of, I have a few friends who are from Thailand, and obviously just being in the fight community, people have gone, is how do you kind of juxtapose that type of almost like, oh, how would you describe, like, subversive imperialism? Because Thailand itself has never actually been physically imperialized, right?
Right.
But you
But
can,
the main, the main argument in academia is that the reason why Thailand wasn't colonialized was because it self-colonialized. It was under pressure to show itself as civilized, and so it changed itself before the British could come and force them to change. And actually, this Peter Vale article, I read it last night. Again, I stumbled back upon it because I was thinking I was going to talk to you. He recounts the entire process of British boxing coming to Muay Thai, coming to Thailand in the early 1900s. British boxing, Queensberry rules, was seen as civilized fighting, and Muay Thai as uncivilized fighting. And so the Thais appropriated Queensberry type rule sets, including gloves, the use of gloves and rounds, in order to self-civilize, so that Westerners would not see it in their interest to basically take over the country. Wow. And that's one of the more subtle, I wish I knew Thai culture better, but this was one of the more subtle impacts of Western imperialism, was the way that Thailand willingly adopted Western points of view, strategies, social structures.
And just in the way that you describe that, the verbiage of civilized, the boxing style is civilized, so we must be uncivilized. For me, that's the red flag of, that's the strength of Orientalism, is that they literally were like, oh, look at us, we are uncivilized, we must change our ways. And that's the scary brilliance of the whole thing of capitalism, of Orientalism, is the way that it manifests the change in itself.
Yeah, one doesn't know how much this was internalized and self-policing, or it was simply a strategy by the successive all praised kings of Thailand, who were brilliant kind of like it's not just, part of it is, oh my God, the West is amazing. We want to take some of these techniques and thought patterns for ourselves because they work so well. And then part of it is we have to also portray ourselves in this Western mind frame in order to avoid being invaded and colonized. And that was seen as like a very shrewd tactic rather than something that was kind of put upon Thais. But it's hard to say how much of this was an internalized thing and how much of it was a strategy. But in Thailand, people don't realize that Western boxing has been braided with Muay Thai for 100 years. That they were taught side by side in the academy under a single martial art name, which was just Muay. And the concepts of civilization, being civilized, was a major component of how Muay Thai developed, with boxing right alongside of it. So it's a very interesting thing because you can't extract out the pure Muay Thai even. It's been braided with Western concepts. Like right now we're like MMA and kickboxing is putting this pressure on Muay Thai, right? And distorting it. It's been happening for 100 years with British boxing, where Baran fighting with rope-bound hands was seen as savage. And I don't know if the Thais saw it as savage, but they were told it was savage. You can read, I'll send you this article, you can read the reports from British reporters describing Baran fighting and about basically how savage it is.
And what you see a similar thing happen. I've been using it in my literature review as like a cross comparisons. You see the exact same thing happen with indigenous people in lacrosse. The way the indigenous people played lacrosse was savage and unruly and
really?
Not fit for the gentlemen of the upper crust Victorian era living in northeastern the United States, living in Canada. So what you saw was that the indigenous people of the Americas, they pushed back really hard against it, and I think that has a lot to do with just the way that the Americas were colonialized. They didn't kind of take that like, oh, we see this coming. They didn't have a chance to see it coming. To try to absorb whatever, they were forced into this thing where they had to, either you play lacrosse the way they play lacrosse or you don't play lacrosse. What do you want to do? And so you see that exact same thing happen. The upper crust Victorian era of the popularity of lacrosse becoming a rationalized, unified, codified sport saw the indigenous players as savage, as this is an unrefined way to play, when in essence that was the development of what lacrosse should have been. And then when they changed that, they had a hard time keeping up. Lacrosse was played on a field that could have been a mile long because you might have had 30 players. And the more players you had, of course, the bigger field that you needed, and the more players meant that you needed higher scoring. But that was unrefined. That was not codified. How are we supposed to have a gentleman's tournament? How can we have a gentlemanly boxing if there are no unified codes? Like, and what do you mean that, like, I'm not going to wear synthetic, man-made commercialized equipment? Like, what do you mean I'm going to use and that was one of my things with starting this thesis, was the conceptualization of nature in it. Like, that's, if my understanding is right, that's natural cotton hemp material that they're wearing around their hands. That is nature. That is one with the fiber. Whereas the boxing glove is this leather padded, thing that protects you, not just your hand, but your face. It's not as, and then one of the things that you kind of remind me of is the way that things seem to have come full circle, where it's just like, we looked at Thais or indigenous lacrosse and thought it was savage because of whatever reason, elbows or unrefined.
Right.
But now But now if you really look at what's valued in commercialized fighting, that's way more savage. There's no control. There's no respect for the other person. It's just let me hit you as many
Right?
times.
Isn't it
Yeah.
amazing?
Like, how is that not savage? What's the refinement in that?
Well, I think colonialistic tendencies have passed into a different era where they're no longer in the hands of an elite class that has a very codified way of behavior. And now that we're in a kind of late capitalism, consumerist society, it's really about appealing to the widest audience as possible. And so that's where you want things that really kind of pull on the more base affects of a human being, which are anger, rage, that kind of thing. The things that excite you quickly, just like everybody's eating sugar, everybody's feeling rage, whether they're watching their political TV show or watching a fight. They want to just excite the human organism quickly over and over again, like crack cocaine. So I think that you're right, though. It has come full circle. One thing I want to mention that's kind of interesting about the addition of these gloves, which is it. One small point is Westerners are like, oh, when the glove hits the face, that's the biggest score of all. And Thais are like, no, that's a padded thing. That's not really a big score. I don't know why you're making a big deal out of that. But with another component of that padded, non-natural state is the introduction of the shin pad. The shin pad is something new to Thailand. People did not have shin pads in the 90s, the 2000s. Now Thai gyms, like small Thai gyms even, are starting to have them. What's one thing we've talked to the legends about is that the introduction of the shin pad has really changed Thai technique. It used to be that you sparred bare shin, like only. And because you sparred bare shin as a kid all the way up, one, you developed a very light concept of play, because you're not going to be bashing people with an unprotected shin. It made you develop a very surreal sense of balance and control, not only offensively but defensively. As people now, part of the pedagogy is to have shin pads, even Thais, the Thai technique is changing. That sensitivity that comes from being unpadded is now being lost. Like the Thais that are raised now cannot compare to the people who were raised in the late 80s and 90s in terms of their balance and their awareness, their shin awareness, maybe is the way to put it. So I don't know, that's another element of this kind of like commercialization of the process, but Thais themselves are excited by the idea of having equipment, of having shin pads, of not being a poor person's gym, right?
Right.
It is not just this thing that the West puts on like an evil thing. It's also involved in the culture itself wanting to raise itself up to a world standard. One of the interesting things about boxing and Muay Thai and the civilization of Muay Thai through boxing is that in Thailand, even to this day, a boxing world champion is far more esteemed than a Muay Thai champion. Like for instance, we were talking to Karahat, one of the legends that we're close to, and he was talking about Samrak. Samrak was this really wonderful fighter who never got to fight for a belt in Thailand, and he ended up going to boxing and winning a gold medal. When he became a gold medal boxing winner of the gold medal, he became a superstar in Thailand, like way beyond anything he would have been if he had won the Lumpini belt. For us in the West, gold medal boxing, Lumpini belt, they seem about even. There's no comparison. And Karahat said, Samrak was a good fighter, but if he hadn't gone on to win the gold medal, nobody would have remembered him. He would have just been forgotten in the sea of fighters. And even to this day, the Thai champions are not thought of anywhere near the world boxing champions, because when Muay Thai fighters, and almost all boxing champions of Thailand were Muay Thai fighters first, go to prove their excellence on the world stage, on the international Western stage, there's tremendous pride in that success. There's tremendous pride. And so that internalization of proving yourself under the standards of others is very motivating in Thailand.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I like that. Hopefully I'm not going to diverge too far from the points you just made. I really like all
Not
of
at
that.
all. Not at all.
But the one thing I picked up on was the importance, and I think Bourdieu talks about this a little bit, but the importance of play within learning and embodying these kind of techniques. The Iroquois used to talk about that too with lacrosse. Lacrosse was play to prepare you for the harshness of what you might deal with in a battle in real life situation.
Yes.
You know, and I used to talk about all the time whenever like people want to talk to me about Muay Thai. I'm like, look at the way that they're playing. It's not a malice intent. It's a thing where like I'm gonna learn to touch you. I'm gonna learn to put my foot right on your stomach, and I'm not gonna hurt you.
Yeah. The play. You see it in BJJ, I think, probably in Brazil. At least I've heard that there's a lot of rolling, but non-aggressive rolling. That it's just lots of time spent in a kind of play-like scenario. You get that in Cuban boxing, apparently. That is not a regimented process. There's a lot of play. I've heard that in Russian wrestling, there's a lot of play in the practicing of techniques. For sure in Thailand, play is a huge dimension of, especially when you're learning as a kid. You wouldn't see it much. You get it in soccer. The greatest soccer nations in the world are ones where kids play. You get it in American basketball. The way that things are taught is you have to play on the playgrounds all the time in order to get the technique in your body. So the way that these things are being taught in the propagation through the keyhole is so far from that importance. But it's very difficult because you're teaching adults as an adult in a structured, class that lasts an hour and a half or something, right?
And also in a manner where play is leisure, play is not productive.
That's true too. Yeah, that's very true. That's a very big Thai cultural element, is that the line between work and play, or sanuk as they call it, there's no line. That you have sanuk in labor. Like they're all a single piece. It's not two different things. Whereas you're right, a kind of industrialized concept of childhood is a time of play, and then adulthood is a time of work when you become a laborer, and life is no fun anymore, right? So, yeah, I think that dichotomy is also a problem in the way that we think about learning a martial art.
Yeah, and that comes with just learning the control and what it's like to be in that situation, to overcome, like you said, the harshness and the rashness of getting hit in the head, getting hit in the side. Like that is not a natural thing to have happen to you for no other reason, right? Like to overcome it seems harsh to have a kid, boxing in a ring, but it's also really harsh to put them in football pads and tell them to smash into each other.
Right.
That's a very unnatural thing to do, and the thought processes that you have and being able to cope with that situation is a much different thing.
And the thing about you mentioning about play is that when you do get, let's say, hit in the head or in the face in a play scenario and you're a kid, you get that rush of emergency. The body will tense up and you'll be but the conditions of the play convince you, there's no escalation here.
Right.
That was nothing. It was just a tumble. That was just a thing. And so you learn to associate that when your body has that instinctual surge, when there's something painful that happens to you, you realize that it's not an emergency situation, that in one more second, it'll calm down. And that you learn this pattern of kind of de-escalation, that if you don't learn that pattern when you do fight as an adult and you do get hit, all you can do is stress. All you can do is just go to 11 out of 10, because you've never felt going from 5 to 6 to 3 over and over and over again, which is what happens with play.
Right.
So that pattern too is one of the more beautiful patterns about fighting, about the art of fighting.
Right, and that's one of the things that we used to talk to about. So with the kung fu that I did, it's very self-defense oriented. It does not transfer well to sport. It transfers beautifully into performance, but it does not transfer well into sport. And one of the things that we used to talk about when training something like a corrections officer or training something like a loss prevention officer is that, like, the idea of me putting hands on somebody totally escalates that experience.
Yeah.
And you're not even talking about, again, we're not talking about cynicism or malice. We're talking about, that's an experience of someone is grabbing me.
Yeah.
Forget anything else that's happening. That whole situation is escalating. And the intent that you put on somebody, even if you know that this is not a good individual doing something very scary, the intent in which I put my hands on you is going to dictate the rest of that interaction. And if I come at you and I boom grab onto your arm and I'm tense and I'm scared, that transfers into that other person. And you know, and if the hardest thing to do is to keep your composure in a situation that is very unnatural and very instinctual, but in doing so, I get to control that situation. Like, I need you to come here with me. Like, I have control at any moment that I'm ready, but I'm not alarming to this person who could be a very dangerous person if I alarm them right away, even just out of pure instinct.
Yes, and it's making me think back to what you said about a Thai kick. The Thai is not throwing that kick necessarily to be as hard as it possibly can. Much of the orchestration of the opponent by the Thai is to not escalate until there is a decisive moment. So they might land that kick at 40% power, 40% power, 40% power, because they don't want the fight to escalate at that moment. They're literally conducting what is going to happen with very sophisticated patterns that are all instinctual, all part of the habitus of the fighter, right?
Right.
That's why they're not blasting. Some fighters might blast kicks for another purpose, but that's not the essential component of what's happening when a strike is thrown. Is that there's an orchestration going on. Just like you don't necessarily grab somebody hard by the arm, you would only do that if you could secure the moment at that moment. Like, if you could lock it down. But you don't want it to escalate yet. You want to basically guide it towards the result that you're looking for. And that's kind of what one of the cooler things about the more narrative structure of Thai scoring is.
Yeah. And
to me, it's much more fight. Everybody's like, MMA is so fight realistic, and what do you do in an alley and everything? And it's like, the way that Thai fighters have balance and patience and sight and manage their opponent feels much more realistic to actual engagements where fights could take a long time. Fights don't necessarily last 15 seconds.
Right.
That you need to catch your breath and reorganize the situation and make sure that you're defended and can avoid damage as you can. Like, I don't know, there's some elements there where I feel like everybody's like, Muay Thai is so artificial in its scoring. I find it to be very realistic in a strange way. I don't know. That's my own opinion about it.
I absolutely agree, and I think that you're making a really great line of thought and processes there. And what it's reminding me of is actually the more that I listen to you describe Muay Thai and the process of it, the more intricate it sounds. Like, the more sophisticated it starts to become. And it brings me to a point that I tried to make again in talking about indigenous knowledge, and the way that we talk about it up here is traditional ecological knowledge, is that if you actually look at it, thousands of years of people living on the land without caring about potassium or nitrogen, just experiencing the holistic nature of everything. It is in and of itself a very advanced form of thinking. Traditional ecological knowledge, I made a comment in one of our classes one time, as I was like, could traditional ecological knowledge actually be too advanced for modern science?
That's very, very interesting. I think so.
And
Because
so I think we're seeing the same thing with Muay Thai.
well, when you think about it, the amount of, let's just, to use an analogy of computation, the amount of data that can be stored in the habitus of a single individual, which is all the dispositions of how they feel and act within a culture, is an incredible amount of knowledge. That the amount of data is intense because it's distributed through all the information networks of the human being, the organism, well below their conscious mind. The thoughts they can think and make decisions for are just the tip of the iceberg. Then you put that habitus of an individual in a community of individuals that are in the small culture, and each of them is a data bank of an incredible amount of knowledge that very little of it can actually be accessed by conscious thought. So when you're talking about advanced, when there's a tradition that's passed over many generations of a form of life, the wisdom of what they know or the density of their knowledge base is far beyond stuff that can be put in a book or taught to an expert or given to a student, because it's lived over generations. And that it makes a very interesting parallel to Muay Thai, which is the fight knowledge instead of ecological knowledge. The fight knowledge in the ring is distributed not only in the fighter, but in the coaches, the sons and daughters of the family, the betters, the promotion, all the bodies of the culture embody a way of life that expresses itself in the ring at that moment, with certain strikes chosen at a certain moment or a certain thing, things that you could never transmit without living, right? And so I totally agree with you that it is way advanced. Like there's that, and that's why, to not go too far, but Arthur C. Clarke's marvelous definition of magic as any technology that's sufficiently advanced is magic, because you cannot see all the moving parts that make it happen. So the reason why indigenous knowledge becomes kind of exoticized is because you can't perceive all the connectivity that where all the data is connected in all the bodies and all the habitus of every individual. So it appears magical. And therefore, from a science point of view, kind of not real, not quantifiable, not just. Yeah. So that I agree with you 100% on that.
It's not rational. It's not rational. You can't explain it, which is, I think, then why you see the pedagogical, like the way that you learn Muay Thai is not through correction, is not through it's you just do, you do, and you do it again, and you do it again, and you do it again. Yeah. And then maybe by the time you've had X amount of fights or X amount of careers, or not even by then, maybe by the time your 18th student has had their 100th fight, maybe then you might get it.
Yeah, that's amazing. And then that's one thing you get in Thailand, which is so interesting, is that you'll go into a real Thai camp. There could be Westerners or not. A real Thai camp is one that raises Thai boys to fight. Like that. That's the reason that they live, that they're there. And you will find somebody holding pads somewhere who has very low status in the camp. Like they're not esteemed people. They might not be very high at all in society. They might be a low person. Nobody thinks they even fucking know anything, but they've been in the culture and in the living space their whole life. That person knows so much Muay Thai, that has so much knowledge, because they're part of the network of unconscious knowledge about the art, that there's no comparison between that low status person and one of the smartest Western instructors. Like there's no comparison because of the dispositional knowledge that they have. It's absolutely amazing, and these people are everywhere in Thailand. Like that's not even that's not talking about the esteemed people. This is just the people who are not esteemed, who people don't even take very seriously. I don't know. It's like literally there's the streets are paved with gold kind of feeling.
Yeah, and I saw that exact point. I think it was in the video of like just one of Sylvie's training days. You said, and it was like she was talking about one of her sessions, and like she described one of the people who came up to her to tell her about something in her clinch was like just one of the dudes who hangs out at the studio, and I
Yeah.
was just like, my first reaction was like, who's this dude coming up to Sylvie and telling her what to do? And then like the way that she was engaged with him, and then the kind of narration afterwards, and just my own understanding, I was like, oh, it doesn't matter if he's really ever fought, and it's the fact that he has been there every single day. He goes there every single day. He listens, he sees, he absorbs.
You absorb it.
That it's not a parent who shows up 3 times a week and now is telling one of my students, pick your hand up or whatever. No,
It's
this
very
is
different.
this is the person who is there listening to me talk, or listening to these people around them talk. And that was like a really crystallizing moment where at first I was kind of offended, like, look at this dude talking to one of the fighters, and then just like seeing the engagement, thinking about those things, the habitus of just being there, being in his body. I was like, no, he's probably exactly the person to be doing that right now. He's not only seen and heard everything, he's seen 1,000 boys, he's seen 1,000 Westerners, he's
Yeah.
seen just as many people.
100%. And one of the things we've discovered in interviewing legends, and that Sylvie's kind of figured out for herself as well, is that one of the greatest learning experiences of Thai boys is not the fights they have. Yes, the fights they have are learning experiences. It's all the times they go to fights, all the things they absorb preparing a teammate for a fight, in the corner watching the crew correct somebody when they come back to the corner. There is an absorption of knowledge. All the time they spend in the gym watching a more advanced fighter on the bag, that it's really, the exposure is a life form exposure, just like you would in any culture, like the habitus, the idea that just by living in a way of life, you develop skills and knowledge. That if you grow up in a rough neighborhood, you know how to walk across the other side of the street. You know, that nobody told you to walk the other side of the street when a certain kind of person comes. You just learn this is how you do. And that kind of knowledge comes from literally being in it and watching. So I'm not sure how to preserve any of this or to help make the Western keyhole version of it more rich. I feel like we're going there because part of it is that, like one of the things Sylvie making the Muay Thai library is you just put we've got 60 hours of instruction of these guys up, and the important parts are not even the actual technique that gets shown, but how it's shown, when it's shown, the silence of like not correcting it or correcting it at a certain time, like all these things. Each video is a fucking like bottomless well of knowledge. I think that people now are starting to perceive how incredible the Amazon is, basically.
Right.
And that at least now we have an interest in preserving it, even if we might not be able to.
Sometimes I think just the, like what one of the things I'll tell students all the time is like, I'll tell them something like repeatedly. I'll like, put your hand up, put your hand up, put your hand up. And what I tell them is progress is the time when I look at them and they thought to themselves, hand up. I was like,
Yeah.
that's it. You're thinking about it now.
Right.
And the fact that people are starting to think about this, how can we preserve, might kind of have to be what at least us in this generation or previous generations kind of have to settle for. It's like, okay, well, at least they're aware of it now. Like, I've done the best that I can. Which is what I think is really great about your all's work is the juxtaposition it is to everything else, the pace of the videos, the look and the feel. And I think that's a really great way that you all, because even in just the people I'm talking to, it's like, well, isn't that appropriative? Aren't we taking their culture? Aren't we doing this? And I didn't have an answer. And then in the article that you sent me, I was like, but look at the way that we're presenting it. Yes, I only know a handful of Muay Thai techniques, and my Muay Thai techniques are from going and holding pads from people who were in the thick of Muay Thai. And my emphasis isn't just turn your hips like a Thai. My emphasis is feel this motion. And that's the best way for me to preserve the art as I can, is those little nuances of how I instruct and how I present the information.
There's this is a little bit of a side turn, but I just want to say it. There's a man, there's 2 videos up in the library. General Ton Macomb, he is the last direct descendant of the man who basically created Muay Lertrit, which is a military version of Muay Thai. This man developed Muay Lertrit out of a Muay Karat, which is a Baran style, but also he was a naval officer who traveled the world. So he also pulled from martial arts that he encountered as he was traveling throughout Asia, I assume. This master created this the military version of Muay Thai, and then taught it only to officers. It was taught to nobody but military officers. General Ton Macomb is the only surviving, from we know, the only surviving direct student of his. He right now has nobody to teach this style to. He has nobody. He has been teaching senior citizens in Bangkok this incredible style just as a health class. He has asked us to please find a sincere student that will train for 6 months under me and then pass this on to someone else. So this is literally a kind of fusion between traditional martial arts, where you have a distinct style, and living Muay Thai too. And you have a line that is about to end. Like his friend who was teaching with him, Siri Mongkon, died. We were able to film with him, but he died a few months ago. And this man, the general, is like, I really need someone to pass this on to. So I'm just saying this to you. Think to yourself if you want to come to Thailand for 6 months and study under this guy, because I think someone like you would absorb at a very real, I don't want to plan your life for you, but I'm going to tell you, he would be very happy to have you as a student, and it would blow your mind. Check the 2 videos out in her Muay Thai library. One is just him, and then one is him and Siri Mongkon. And I don't know, just talking to you and about the care we have for preserving things. These things are on the edge of ending. These literally people are on the edge of stopping. And when he goes, it'll all be gone. That's why we're trying to film with him, but it's hard to film with him because he's in Bangkok. And it's the kind of thing where you really need to spend a few months with him, really. But we feel like Muay Thai is filled with these kinds of stories where there are just lineages that are starting to end. I don't know. It's very upsetting in a way. Yeah.
Oh, you are totally going to get me out there for something like that. But then I also, in doing this project, you all give me a lot of kind of hope for how to do it, because in doing all of this, one of my thoughts has been well, do I really have any right to go over to Thailand and kind of take this thing? Am I just being part of that process? I mean, everything that was before looking into the way that you all are coming about it from this preservation, angle, and not just an angle, that's what you're doing. Yeah. Kind of maybe no, okay, it's about my intent when I come over there. What am I doing? But something like this,
you responsibly participate. The truth of the matter is that Muay Thai is endangered because of market forces, no matter what. It's like a fucking steamship that's going, and we are just maybe we should avoid that iceberg. But the thing it is moving towards radical change, and so let's just try to save as much of the rainforest as possible, is the kind of feeling we have.
Right.
Let's participate in a way that encourages others to participate in that kind of way. With the
Right.
general, though, there are no Thais interested in learning what he knows. They either want an immediate fighting style, or they're kind of high-so people who are more interested in the kind of more Thai camp kind of experience. He's much more of a kind of like, I am the master teaching you these principles and techniques, breathing techniques and everything. And I'm telling you, if I put the two of you together, you would thrive. And he would have a student. I'll give you some links offline to where you can talk to his nephew who's trying to find somebody.
Okay.
And if you know anybody who'd be interested in this, but this is the kind of thing. This is literally a chance to save a disappearing line of Muay Thai. Like,
Right.
to save it. It won't save it entirely as it was created, but it will keep it from dying.
Right. After this thesis is over with, Kevin.
Okay. I'm very good, very good. So maybe we'll see about maybe a Sylvie interview or something.
If it's
or
okay with you, I know she's busy. No pressure. If it works out, it works out. I've loved this conversation, and I'm hoping we can maybe have another one and keep even just continue a dialogue.
Sure.
And just kind of keep this going. This has been a wonderful learning experience. We're going 2 hours. Kevin.
Oh my God, that's incredible. Okay, but that's good. That's what I want. I want these kinds of conversations happening because it's unknown what will come from them, right?
Right.
Yeah. Okay, I'll talk to you later.